Mr. Gary D. Stepp has been an educator for 37 years. After graduating from Madison Central High School in Richmond, Kentucky, he attended Alice Lloyd College, where he received his BA and was a 4-year member of the Eagles basketball team. He then received his master's degree from Morehead State University. He served our region for 14 years as an employee of the Martin County, Kentucky Board of Education. He then moved to Pippa Passes, where he has served for the past 23 years. For the past 17 years, he has served Alice Lloyd in various roles. These include instructor, athletic director, sports information director, dean of men and associates men, head basketball coach. He has coached basketball for 26 years. His wife, Dr. Lisa Stepp, also serves as a professor at Alice Lloyd and is an alumnus of the college. They have one daughter, Elizabeth, who is a graduate of June Buchanan School and is in her senior year at the University of Cumberland. His hobbies include history, traveling, reading, and running. Please welcome Mr. Gary Stepp.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. This was a nice sneaky way to get you in for a class, and without you realizing that's what you're here for. Today is Constitution Day, and when you ask people, what do you know about Independence Day? Oh, everybody knows Independence Day, July 4th, national holiday, celebrating the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But when you ask people about Constitution Day, it's rare if you can find somebody who says, oh, September 17th, 1787 is when the Constitution was signed. I asked my classes this, and I think out of all my students, one said, I may have an idea what Constitution Day is. Don't feel bad if you did. It surprises me how little is focused on Constitution Day when Independence Day is such a major part of everything we know. What I want to talk to you about today is the importance of Constitution Day, the importance of what happened that led up to this. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are kind of the beginning and in a way the end of what started our country. The two most important documents in the history of our country are the Declaration and the Constitution. So, I want to talk a little bit about some background that leads up to it, and then we'll just kind of go from there. First thing you got to remember, and I got a lot here I see that have had me in class before, so some of the things you hear are things you've heard. But I'm basically condensing several weeks of talking about this into a session today. But when you look back at our country, you got to remember that when we were colonies, we were subject to the King of England. That's what we answered to. We were not a united country. We were under the rule, and during the Revolutionary times, it was King George. He controlled what we did. There were governors appointed over the colonies, and those governors kind of ruled the colonies. So for a while, that went okay. Things were pretty good. We had a good relationship for the most part. It was an advantage. We had protection from Great Britain. We had trade with Great Britain. So there were some things they brought that were good. But things started to happen that kind of put chinks and started to dig away at that relationship. You all may remember from history, definitely in the 1750s, what's known as the French and Indian War happened. France and Great Britain were fighting over territory in the New World. After a period of 7 years of fighting, roughly 9 years between the beginning and the treaty signed, Great Britain wanted a lot of land. Well, we were part of Britain. So, in a way, I guess it was good for us. In fact, individual who got his start during that battle, which is where he began to get his military experience, was none other than George Washington, who was fighting, serving the British. When this ended, land was won for Britain, which was a good thing for them. But there's one thing about wars, and you all that had me before, we've talked about this. When you have wars, there's a cost of men, and there's also a monetary cost. and wars are expensive. So when this ends, more property goes to Britain, but they've got to pay for it. So they started to think, well, this fighting happens over in the colonies. Doesn't it only make sense that the colonists should help pay for this? That's logical. Yeah, that makes sense. We're doing this to protect them, so they should have to pay for it. So they started instituting a series of taxes on the colonists so they could recoup some of their money. Again, that bottom dollar, they needed money. They needed money. Britain fought a lot, and their big enemy was France, which goes on for a little while. But they needed money to make this up. So, when this happened, some of the colonists were like, no, wait a minute. You want us to pay these taxes. The fighting was over here, so we're the ones that had to put up with this. We're the ones, it's on our soil. None of it's over in England. London's not being attacked. It's here. And you want us to pay taxes to support you. And the big gripe they had goes back to something you all may remember hearing, a phrase that came out right after some of the acts. The first one they put in was the Stamp Act. You all may remember that. And it was a phrase that starts, taxation without representation. So basically what the colonists were saying is this. Now wait a minute. You want to be able to tax us, but we have no representative for the colonies in Great Britain who's speaking on our behalf. So in other words, you can tax us anytime you want, but we can't do anything about it. Basically, we just have to take our lumps. Yes, sir, we understand, that's it. That doesn't seem right. That's not fair. So this kind of started a snowball rolling. And then you have events over about the next 11 or 12 years, things like the Boston Tea Party and things that originate all because our relationship was deteriorating with Britain. Well, you finally get into the mid-1775 range, you got people that are saying, wait a minute, why do we even want to be a part of Great Britain? Why shouldn't we want to be our own nation? They're way across the ocean. Why shouldn't they be able to control us and tell us what to do? Why shouldn't we have a say? Why shouldn't we be our own country? 1776, July 4th, after meetings, Declaration of Independence. Main author of that, Thomas Jefferson, brilliant writer, puts into words a Declaration of Independence. And basically what the Declaration of Independence was, the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson was a lawyer, and it was like a lawyer's brief, basically saying, we need to be our own country because of the way you're treating us, King George, and here's the reasons why. And then he lays out the reasons of all the things that they're doing that we disagree with. And he's got about 27, 28 of those, of things they're doing. And when King George hears about this, basically, these 56 people that signed the Declaration of Independence put their lives on the line. They signed a death warrant if things didn't go their way, because this is treasonous to the king. Treasonous. Basically, they're blasting him, bad-mouthing him, talking about him like a dog, how bad you treated us, and we declare our independence from you. Well, when that happens, his mentality is not, gosh, you're all right, I'm so sorry, please forgive me. How can I treat you so bad? Oh, pretty please, I won't do it anymore. No, that is not at all. Fine, you're going to act that way. We'll send more soldiers over. This will be a quick little war. We'll put you in your place. That was the mentality he had. Well, one of the first things we did, our commanding officer, who, remember during the French and Indian War, George Washington leads us. And it's not like we're just winning all these battles. We don't really even have an army at this time. It's a ragtag bunch, don't have uniforms. They're hiding behind trees, running, fighting. They're not organized. But they're able to hang on. They're able to hang on for a while. The British are winning a lot of the early battles, but they don't quit. I liken it to, if any of you like Rocky, I love the movie Rocky. And it's like, Apollo Creed is beating him to a bloody pulp, but he can't knock him out. He gets up and keeps coming back for more. And his resilience ends up, he lasts through the whole fight. The smartest thing Sylvester Stallone did was lose in Rocky. Because if he won in Rocky, that would pretty much been his career. You all see how he played it on. That's kind of what happened. We just kept fighting and fighting and battling and battling. And then Washington, we started to get more organized. We started to get better. And we started to win some key battles. Finally, the decisive battle that ends the war. Y'all remember where it was at? Yorktown. There you go. If I had a cookie, I'd send it up to you, but I don't have one. Battle of Yorktown. Washington defeats Cornwallis. 1781. And that ends the Revolutionary War. Takes 2 years before the Treaty of Paris is signed. But now, we have won. We are our own country. Now, while this Revolutionary War is going on, once we signed the Declaration, we did have to have something to govern us. So we came up with what you all know as the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was the first thing that kind of led us, that guided us. And it got us through the war. It did what it needed to do to get us through the Revolutionary War. But once the battle ended, once we actually had won, things didn't go so good. The problem was the Articles of Confederation, they weren't that strong. They were really kind of weak. They didn't have a lot of strength to them. You all that had me before, I used the phrase, they didn't have a lot of teeth to them. They couldn't really do anything. They didn't really have a lot of authority or a lot of power. So what started happening was the 13 colonies that were now states, rather than coming together and uniting after this, they kind of acted like 13 separate countries. They each had their own money. They could tax how they wanted. They could build how they wanted. They were separate. They were not united states. They were just 13 states at this time. Still were. So the problem was the Articles of Confederation. War is expensive. We talked about that. They needed to raise some money for us. They needed to do taxes, which led to the war. But they couldn't enforce it. They couldn't force the states to collect the taxes. It was almost like, pretty please, will you get tax money and send it to the government? That's kind of how it was. And if they didn't like a law that was passed by the federal government, the states ignored it. They just ignored it. They could take control. They could basically decide their own laws. So as the time's going on, they see, okay, this isn't working too good. Something probably needs adjusted with these Articles of Confederation. So there was a movement led by a name you all have heard of from history, Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton worked to get the states to come together and let's meet to discuss the Articles of Confederation. Now they set up a meeting to do this. And of the 13 states, 5 showed up. That's how much it meant to them at the time. 5 left. That's a running number. 5 showed up. So they're not going to get nothing done. That's not even half of the states. But the states were kind of like, well, we don't really want to change anything. We'll just go along like we're going. What happened in late 1786 after this, it kind of was a turning point. From history, it's known as Shays' Rebellion. Roughly a group of farmers that couldn't pay their mortgages were being arrested and put in jail. And they were taking their property, and they got mad about it. A lot of these had fought in the Revolutionary War. And they were saying, here we are putting our life on the line for our country, and this is the way we're being treated. And Daniel Shays, a farmer, led a group of farmers in Massachusetts, and they revolted. And when they revolted, they went and they were basically freeing prisoners that had been locked up for not paying their debts. They were running judges and things out of town, running wild in the streets, basically, is what they were doing. And they marched on to Springfield and tried to take over the armory there to get weapons. Now, they did put them down. They had to use cannons. And they killed 3 of them. But for the first time, the states got scared. Wait a minute. We're not united like we need to be. These Articles of Confederation are too weak. This could happen in our state. people may rebel. And what it was, they couldn't really protect. They were kind of on their own. So they set up a new convention. They called for it in 1787. They were going to come and meet again in May of that year. And they were going to meet in Philadelphia. And it was called the Constitutional Convention. So they went to set this up. And now the states were more eager to come and talk. Now, they made a point to say, we want to meet at this convention to take the Articles of Confederation and strengthen them. Because they're not strong enough, they're too weak. Got to strengthen them. Put some more meat on the bone. But there was a group of people led by a Virginia delegation, led basically by a gentleman you all may have heard of named James Madison, who were thinking, along with Hamilton, we need to change this. This isn't working good. We just need to scrap it and do something different. But they didn't announce that yet. They knew if they said, we need to get rid of the Articles of Confederation, we're going to come and propose something different, that the states wouldn't have went along with it. Now, there's a reason for that. We were under the rule of King George. So we were under the absolute rule of a king. The Articles of Confederation gave more laws, more rights, more power to the states, not the government. They were so fearful of a king or just a small group taking complete control that they went the opposite with the Articles of Confederation. So make sure you understand that. That was the reason behind it. But Madison and some of the delegates from Virginia knew we've got to have a stronger central government. So they set this meeting up. And it's going to be, again, 1787 in Philadelphia. And it's going to start in May. Now, the most important decision that has to happen right off the bat is this. They know we've got to have somebody to preside over this meeting. We've got to have somebody that the people, the citizens, will trust. That they will put confidence in. Who in the world should we ask to preside over our convention? Any of you got any recommendations?
Washington.
George Washington. Washington, at this time, is the most famous American worldwide. It used to be Benjamin Franklin before the war. Franklin was known as an inventor, had traveled to Europe and was well thought of. But Franklin was a bit older by this time. He was 81 years old. Washington. Washington was the most loved, most respected. He was a commanding general that led the forces. When the war ended, he went back to Mount Vernon, his plantation. He loved farming. That's what he loved. And he went back. That's what he planned on doing. So they contact him and say, we're going to have this convention, and we want you to come and preside over it. And he says, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not going to do it. And they were stunned. He didn't want to do it. He was happy back home. He was happy out of the public life for the most part. So what they do is Madison and a general named Knox, who had served under Washington that he respected, went to see him at his home. Any of you here from Tennessee and know the town of Knoxville, named after General Knox. And I've told my classes, in my opinion, Madison talked to him, and I think Madison said something along the lines of this to him. And when you look at these two, you're looking at two completely different, polar opposite in body and size. Washington was about 6'2", 6'3", rugged, strong, expert horseman. This is at a time when the average height of a man was about 5'7". So Washington was an imposing figure. Madison was right over 5 foot tall and weighed about 100 pounds. He was a little scrawny runt. That's what he was. But he had a brilliant mind. He was excellent at bringing people together. Mentally, he was a giant. And I think he talked to Washington and said, you know what? We understand you not wanting to come. You've had some health issues. You've served your country well. This country loves what you've done. But you know, Washington, if I go up there, if we go back and say you're not coming, what kind of impression is that going to give? What kind of impression is that going to give? I'll tell you, sir, They're going to say, if General Washington can't support this, something's wrong with it. It's bad. It's bad. That's how much you're respected, sir. So please reconsider. And I think that and other things that he looked at, his health got a little bit better. I think Washington ended up realizing that. He ended up realizing that by not going, it would send a bad message. Washington knew changes needed to be made. But when you take somebody like that and he doesn't endorse it, it's like these celebrity endorsements. Gatorade got Michael Jordan to endorse it because people liked Michael Jordan. He was good at what he did. And if he endorsed your product, you would sell more. Well, they want George Washington to endorse this product. And if Michael Jordan had came on and said, Gatorade stinks. Gatorade, it tastes like garbage. If you drink it, you'll get sick. How much? Oh yes, we want to drink it. We want it. No. If this constitutional convention happens, I'm not going, then it's bad. It stinks. It's garbage. That's the impression he would have gave. So Washington ends up agreeing to go. So the convention, they meet in Philadelphia. They actually meet at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, which is the same place the Declaration of Independence was signed. Whoops. The mic went out. I know I got a loud voice, so I'll talk if I need to. Let's try again. Is this one? Oh, good. Back up. Okay. So they go to the convention. And now the first order is they appoint George Washington to be the head of this, to preside over it. During the actual convention itself, Washington doesn't offer a lot of, he mostly sits, he's kind of the moderator over this. He sits on a little bit of a platform. They have a chair set up for him. He sits in. They know that this could get heated. And to me, he's the perfect judge, the perfect respect. He can keep order. People can say what they want, but I think if it starts getting a little too volatile, a little bit too rough, so you two guys get mad at each other and you're about to start yelling and you start screaming, and there's going to be a big brawl here, a big wrestling match here, big time WWF wrestling right here between Larry and Charles. But Washington had enough respect that I think if it got heated, he could. Now, gentlemen, okay, let's calm this. Let's keep control. Let's calm this down. And there was enough respect for him, they would have done that. So Washington was a good choice to be in that position. So now they get together under the premise of changing the Articles of Confederation. But that's not what they do. When they get there, they decide, we're going to take the Articles of Confederation and wad them up and throw them in the garbage can. And we're going to come up with something completely new. A completely new form of government. And that's what their plan is. Now, when they sit and talk, even with George Washington, they're presiding over this. They're in Philadelphia. The first thing they decide to do is they all swear an oath of secrecy. Imagine this happening today. Every one of the delegates that were there, and initially there was 55 there, promise, they swear an oath, they will not discuss what happens inside the building when they leave. They take and seal the windows. They close the doors. They put guards out. People in Philadelphia know something's going on, but they don't exactly know what's going on. What exactly is it they're doing? They know the famous people of the time there, including General Washington, but they don't really know what they're doing. And believe it or not, none of them talk any about it. Even George Washington, in his diary of notes he kept, the only thing he would write on those days was, convention met today. He didn't put anything else down. It's amazing how they did. You all know today the way it is, something happens in Congress, somebody says something, before the meeting's over, the rumors spread like wildfire. That's why they did that. Because they didn't want it to be, when something came up, then afterwards they're in a tavern talking about it, and somebody goes in there, do you know what he said today? Can you believe he brought this up? That was a guy, can you believe they would even think of something like that? And you all know how it is, how rumors go and how they spread. Oh my gosh, you cut your finger? Oh my gosh, did you hear what happened? He about ripped his finger off. By the time he gets over here, oh my gosh, did you hear what happened? Joseph had to have his arm amputated. But because of the way it spreads. That's what they didn't want to happen. And that's what didn't happen because of the way they conducted things. Now, the problem they had a little bit of, it was so doggone hot in there. Weather conditions were bad, so it wasn't good. So that led to some arguments and some things. But it didn't go just like a breeze. They didn't all come in. Everybody was on the same page. Oh, this is going to be easy. We got an easy constitution. We'll knock this off in a week. That didn't happen at all. There were areas of dissension right off the bat. Areas of disagreements. Now, the first main disagreement was this. How in the world are we going to have representation? They did decide they did want to have a chief executive. They knew they needed like somebody to like preside over everything, to come to lead. They knew they needed to have a court system, and they knew that they needed to have a legislative body. But how are they going to make it work? So the very first proposal was by the state of Virginia. Madison helped craft this, but he didn't present it. Another delegate did. But basically they came up, you all that had me before, with the Virginia plan. And they got up and presented this. And roughly it was this. Okay, what we'll do is, for the legislative branch, we're going to have what's called a bicameral system. It's going to be made up of a House and a Senate. And the representation you get is going to be based on population and wealth. And by wealth, that means the more you can pay in taxes, the more representatives you get. So this was what the Virginia proposal was. Virginia was a big state. So this was kind of known as the big state plan, the Virginia plan. So in other words, the representatives you get that's going to vote on the laws, vote on all of this, is going to be based on how many people are in your state and how much money and taxes does your state present. Now, you all that had me before know my chant. During revolutionary times, whenever they gave speeches and there was something said that the crowd liked, the cheer, like now at a game, you know, yay, hooray, there it was, huzzah, huzzah. And I can see that proposal being made, and all the big states, after it was read, the big states all jumping up and cheering, huzzah, huzzah, and that's what they're doing. And I can see him going off and high-fiving his buddies. Yeah, that was great. Great proposal. Great proposal. The big states loved it. Loved it. But all the states aren't big states. They're little states. And the little states said, whoa, 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 wait a minute. You're saying the representation is going to be based on how many people are in your state and how much tax money you pay? Sure, that's logical. And they didn't huzzah, boo, hiss that. No, it's bad. So the little states get together. We got to come up with something different. And they come up with what is known as the New Jersey plan. And they get up to present it. Oh, here's our plan. Our plan is this. We're not going to have a bicameral legislature with a House and a Senate. We're going to have just one, and it's based solely on each state gets the same. Every state's equal. Every state is invested in this, so everybody gets the same amount of representation. And the little state people, huzzah, huzzah, yes, we love that. And the high fives are going among the little states. And the big states are over here going, whoa, 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 wait. We are going to be paying more in taxes. We're going to have more people. That's not fair to us. And the little states said, well, if it's based on population, you're bigger than us, so you're paying more in taxes. That's not fair to us. So you got a major argument going here. Major argument. So what they do is get together a group of 11 who get together. Benjamin Franklin's one of them, and they come up with a compromise. And the compromise is known as the Connecticut Compromise. And basically, here's what it was. They come up and say, okay, big states, you want representation to be based on population and taxes paid. And the big states, yes, yes. Obviously, huzzah, huzzah, yes. Because we're paying more. But little states, you all want the representation to be based on all states are equal. Huzzah, yes, yes, because we'll get swallowed up. Here's a proposal. We'll have a bicameral system. We'll have a Senate. And in the Senate, every state will have equal representation. And the other part will be the House. And the House will be voted on by the citizens, and representation is based on your population. So they thought, okay, each of us got to give some, got to compromise. Connecticut compromise. And that passed. That was the first thing that passed. So that was a point of contention that passed. Another point of contention that came up was on trade with other countries. The southern states were worried that the northern states would get separate trade agreements like with other countries and basically keep them out of the mix. They compromised on that and said any trade agreements that are made are voted on in the Senate and they have to pass by 2/3. So they went along with that. The other sticking point was slavery. And it was how that figures into this equation, because taxes are based on population, and then you also get representation on how many people are there. So they came up with what was known as the 3/5 compromise. You may remember hearing about that with it. When you look at the Constitution, and I've always said this in my classes, the Constitution's not perfect. There's things about it I don't understand, but the compromises they came up with were compromises they came up with because it wouldn't have passed otherwise. The southern states would not have agreed if they didn't make some of these concessions. So they made a concession for that, the 3/5 compromise. Basically, the South wanted to be able to count any individual who was a slave because population gave you representation. But they agreed to they count only 3 out of every 5. And then the other agreement was after 20 years, the fugitive slave trade would end. So that was the compromise they made. Now, those were the only ones, but those were the big ones. Another big one was how do you pick the president? That was a speculation. They ended up coming up with the ideal you all know today is the Electoral College. The Electoral College. Technically, it's not based on, like when you vote for governor, whoever gets the most votes wins. The Electoral College was designed so each state gets electors based on how many representatives they have. And then the states kind of pledge how your state votes. How does Virginia vote? Those electors say, if our people vote for this candidate, we'll give our electoral votes to this candidate. Then this is where we'll put them at. It's kind of an unwritten rule. It's how they do it. So those were some of the compromises that they came up with that had to be resolved. So those things were done. So after all of this happened, there ended up being, as I told you, 55 starting. At the end of it, some people left. Rhode Island didn't even send delegates. They were the one state that didn't send delegates because the big thing they were so scared of, they were so scared of having, that the government would have too much power and the states wouldn't have any power at all. That's what they didn't want. They were scared to death of that. So a state like Rhode Island didn't even send anybody to the convention for that reason. They were terrified. They had to balance this out. You had to have a constitution that had a strong enough central government to rule and to be able to lead, but it couldn't be all powerful with the states and the individuals, us, didn't have any rights. That's what they were terrified of. So, but finally, after all the compromises, all the discussion, all the talk, September 17th, 1787, it's signed. And of the 42 there, 39 signed it, 3 didn't. 2 of the ones that didn't sign it were actually delegates of Virginia who were close friends with George Washington, and they had a falling out over this because there were people, and a lot of people don't realize, in the Constitution when it was written, there was no Bill of Rights at all. It wasn't in, there was nothing. And they wanted a Bill of Rights. So it wasn't included. But it was ratified. So now it goes to the states. And here's what happens. The states have to vote for this. There's 13 states. 2/3 of them have to vote. If it votes, it becomes the law of the land. 9 states have to vote for it. So it goes to the states. Now, do any of you know when you're driving down the interstate and you're traveling, and if you're like me in the past and you played the license plate game and you look at license plates, do any of you know what state today has on their license plate the first state? Delaware. Delaware quickly ratified it in December of that year. They ratified it in a matter of months. They were okay. They were a small state. They could live with the concessions and they voted for it. Delaware today proudly calls himself the first state. That's why. There were some states that quickly ratified it, but there were other states that were really, really concerned. You have it break into two groups, and you all have heard these names. The people for it called themselves the Federalists, and the people against it called themselves the Anti-Federalists. Exactly. The Federalists wanted it to pass like it was. The Anti-Federalists, they were led by, you all may remember this name, Samuel Adams was their main leader. And they were terrified, there is no Bill of Rights in here. We have to have a Bill of Rights. James Madison is considered the author of this. And Madison did not feel a Bill of Rights needed to be included. And the reason he didn't was because he said, look, if it's not listed in there, that means this that goes to the states. The government can't do anything about it. But they were so terrified, look, our rights, if it's not specifically spelled out, do we have the right? So you had a big discussion with this. And what ended up happening was it was enough that several key states were holding off on ratifying this. So what happened was something you don't see today either. Madison, after hearing what they're saying, ends up deciding, what they're saying does make sense. It does make sense. And the other thing, with it too, he was looking at is, okay, well, how many rights do you put in? How many rights do you have? And that's what some of them came up with. If we put down 20 rights, but somebody does this 21st thing, does that mean it's not a right? You put down 50 while they do the 51st thing. That means it's not a right. So how many do you put in? It's never ending. It's never ending. But he ended up going and saying, all right, we need this to pass. So I promise, if your states ratify this, when the first Congress meets, we will put in a Bill of Rights. He promised this before it even passed. You imagine that happening today. And the states trusted him enough that more of them started ratifying it. And then eventually, within over a year, the ninth state voted for it. And it passed. And now it's the law of the land. All the other states didn't immediately do this, but 9 of them did. So, when they get together in 1789 and have the first Congress, that's the first thing they come up with. Madison brings this up right off the bat. We have got to come up with a Bill of Rights. Have to. And a lot of the delegates didn't want to discuss it. He said, no, we're going to discuss this. My word's on the line. So they work on this and take proposals for a Bill of Rights. Now, initially, there were 17 proposed. They get together, they hammer it down, they talk, they discuss, and they weed it down to 12. 12 of those end up getting proposed, okay? 12 of those end up getting proposed. And they sent them to the states to vote on it. The way it worked was you had to have 2/3 of the Congress say, we want this, and they did. Then 3/4 of the states had to vote for it. And that's what they waited on. But you all that know the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights are the first, how many? First 10. 2 didn't pass. 10 did. So those became the Bill of Rights. Now, what is in this Constitution that they developed? What is in there? Real quick, I'm going to tell you a few things about it. The Constitution itself, believe it or not, was only 4,500 words. Very, very, very short in its initial form. It was broken into 7 articles. Those 7 articles, basically, Article 1 established the legislative branch. That's the House and the Senate. It told the rules, how it would work, qualifications. Article 2 established the executive branch, which we know better by the name. Who's the head of the executive branch? That's President. That was a point of contention. What are they going to call this guy? They had some big, huge, long name. And Washington just thought, just call me the president. That's a whole lot shorter and sweeter. Washington didn't want to come across like as a king, so he picked that. Article 3 establishes the third branch. What's the third branch of government? That's the judicial, the courts, the Supreme Court was discussed. Article 4 was state concerns, and basically what that meant was this. The federal government will protect all states if there's any problems, any attacks. And each state agrees to honor the other state's laws. Those are things Article 4 discussed. Article 5 then discussed the Constitution can be amended. How does that happen? They came up with rules. They anticipated it being amended. How would that happen? Main rule, 2/3 of Congress says we want this amendment. It goes to the states, and 3/4 of the states have to vote on it. And then Article 7, which is the last thing in the original Constitution, basically it set the Constitution as the law of the land. That's the law we will abide by. And officers in positions in the state, in the country, will take an oath to the Constitution and to the country. That's all what was in there initially. Now, they get together, they come up with a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, you all knew correctly, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. Roughly, here's what they are. Amendment 1 to the Bill of Rights, which you all know, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press. Amendment 2, what's the second amendment? Right to bear arms. All of you know that one. A lot of discussion about that. The third amendment basically says that soldiers, the government, they can't seize your home. The soldiers can't go into your homes. They called it quartering soldiers. During revolutionary times, the British soldiers would just come to your house. Oh, Jesse's got a nice house. We're going to take it. And you had to give it to them. That's the way it was. And they were so adamant against that happening that they passed this. And this is a part of one of the amendments. So that's the third one. Then, the other thing they were worried about was court systems and people being treated fairly. So then they had a set of amendments to protect that. Amendment 4, the government can't take your property. You all know this is search and seizure. They can't just come into your house and look around. Oh, we want this, and take it. You all know that. So it's search and seizure. The Fifth Amendment, basically, if you're tried for a crime, you can't be tried for the same crime twice. You all may know that as something else. Double jeopardy. But that's what that goes with it. You don't have to testify against yourself. So it gave court rights to people. Okay? The sixth one, speedy trial in front of an impartial jury. If you go before a trial by jury and you're accused of robbing somebody, that jury shouldn't be made up of that other person's brothers and sisters and cousins and uncles and aunts. Impartial jury. The Seventh Amendment, a jury trial in federal court cases. The Eighth Amendment, no cruel and unusual punishment. Oh, you just littered. That's a $10,000 fine, plus 10 years in jail. Okay? Then, the Ninth Amendment is how Madison addressed the issue of how many amendments do you have? You can't list all of them. There's too many. He came up with a simple statement that said that. The Ninth Amendment is a statement that other rights aside from those listed may exist. So these aren't the only rights you have. And just because they're not listed doesn't mean they can't be violated. So basically what he was saying with that is these aren't the only, just because they're here, they're more, you have more rights than these. So that kind of took care of it. So you're not listing 50, you're not listing 100, you're not listing 500, because you can always come up with another one that's a right you have. And then the 10th Amendment basically says that any power not granted to the government goes to the states. So if it's not granted specifically to the federal government, the states get that. Those were the first 10 amendments that were passed, and they make up the Bill of Rights. Now, the way the Constitution is, it was designed, it can be amended, but it's not easy to do. Any of you remember how many amendments are actually in the Constitution today? 27. So since 1891, 1892, there's only been 17 more amendments added in all those years. There's not too many. So it can be adjusted, but there's a process to it. Another brilliant thing about it, and I'm going to end with this, is the beautiful sets of checks and balances that was made. They were so worried that one branch would have more power than another branch, that what they decided to do was each branch has checks on the other one. Checks on the other one. So none can be too powerful. That was something completely different that had been done before. And that's what made it work. Is our Constitution perfect? No. Are there things about it that I question? Yes. But I think that we have the best and the greatest in the world. There's a reason people want to come here where we have this Constitution, and it's no mystery as to why. So what I'll say is this in closing. Everybody knows about the Declaration of Independence. Independence Day rightfully should be recognized and honored. But as important as the Declaration of Independence is, this gives us the laws of the land. This gives people individual rights. That's what the Constitution does. In my opinion, I think Constitution Day is just as important as Independence Day. To me, it should be recognized as a national holiday just as much, because that's the two most important documents in the history of the country, is those two. Nathan said to ask real quick, does anybody have a quick question? May not be able to answer it, but if you do, feel free to ask. I appreciate your attention today. I appreciate your participation. Made me feel good asking some things and hearing you answer about it. The history of our land is really, it's complex, but it's fascinating too. And so hopefully some of you all are seeing some of those things about it. But that's my take. Nathan, anything you want to add?
Nope.